Welcome to Candid Conversation number 149. Recently I've been recording a lot of messages about the God Delusion, Richard Dawkins' book, and so there are a couple things I wanted to mention about evolution today. People think of that, evolution, you mention that, people think of the Big Bang. Basically that all these particles are just floating out there in the middle of nowhere, and then all of a sudden they come together and boom, life is formed. And then there is this evolutionary process that evolutionists say nowadays, I think it's over the last 4.5 or 4.6 billion years, that these particles somehow have formed into man. And then they claim that there's the survival of the fittest, where if someone is some animals used to exist and now they're extinct, and the reason is because they are no longer fit, that they're fitter animals or better. Evolution says that things started from the puddle and they're going to paradise, whereas God says it's the other way around. And so they would say that there are some species that just didn't survive. They weren't advanced enough to survive, and so they become extinct. And over time, maybe humans will become extinct, and there'll be some greater species. I don't know everything they teach, but I wanted to make some points about all that, the basic what evolution teaches. One is, if evolution exists, then why is there good and evil? I know when I've read Dawkins' book, it seems like a lot of the people are saying that a lot of the arguments are, well, if God is good, why is there so much evil in the world? And so that's one of the arguments that's used to say that there is no designer, no creator, that there had to be evolutionary process. Well, my question is, and Dawkins mentions that the God of the Old Testament, he said, first off, he says that God, the major God of all religions, stems from the God of the Old Testament, the Abrahamic God. Judaism is, of course, based upon that God. That Christianity is just Jesus is this gentler form of the Old Testament God, and then Islam goes back to that mean old vindictive Old Testament God. And so Dawkins' argument a lot of times is just saying that basically that God, as man has created him, as evil, and so my question is, well, if you prove that an evil God does not exist, in other words, it seems like that Christianity says God is good, and evolutionists say that the God of the Bible is an evil God. So, but if the argument is about, is there a God or not who created, it doesn't really matter if he's good or evil. Just because if you're arguing that he's an evil God, that still doesn't prove that God doesn't exist, because you're saying that he still exists. So my question is, if there is not a God, if evolution is true, then why is there evil in the world? I know God gets blamed for a lot of evil. Well, if you remove God, then evil still exists. Why is that? Why is there a sense of good and evil? That certain things, I realize that different cultures over different times have different concepts of what is right and wrong, but every culture has those concepts. They all have laws that they follow. The evolutionists may be more liberal in saying that, well, we should allow, say, pot smoking or wife swapping or whatever they want to allow, but they still have at least some sense of morality. I can't just go and brutally murder somebody. and then eat their body parts. That's seen as evil. Well, why is that seen as evil? If we're just a product of these random events that happen in order to create man, it's really a statistical impossibility that could have even taken place. That we are just that we were designed by chance, or what they call Darwinian natural selection, which is just a fancy way of saying by chance. The statistical improbability is so great, and everything goes from order to disorder in the universe, not the other way around, that really Darwinian natural selection, or chance, or whatever you want to call it, the evolutionary process, could not happen. It's statistically impossible. It's just, it's just like saying that elephant could fly to the moon on his own power. It's just it's just impossible. The elephant's too big. It doesn't have the wings. It doesn't have the capacity to happen. And that's the same thing when it comes to the creation of life on Earth. There had to be a creator. But aside from that, one of the great proofs is that we have a conscience, that we know right from wrong. That's a great proof that there is a God, and that we better listen to him, because we are evil and God is good. But even if God isn't good, even if God is evil, well, how do we know right from wrong? If it's just random parts, you can't explain the conscience. You can't explain that everybody that's ever born has a sense of right or wrong. And they put things in those categories. I recognize atheists are all into tolerance and they're trying to get rid of laws, but still, there is still the innate, that's something that has to be trained to tell you to be tolerant, that there is no right or wrong. You automatically assume, you automatically know that there is a right and there is a wrong. What right and wrong are, that's up to your parents to train you in that, but you still know right from wrong. And that's a great evidence that there is a God. So, because when you look at the animals, for example, they don't grapple with moral issues like humans do. You can see a clear distinction between animals and humans. They're different. Animals, they go by instinct. They may do some things that you would consider evil, but they don't have these moral dilemmas that humans have. They just do whatever instinct tells them to do. But humans, the very fact that they know right from wrong proves that there is a God. And I know people will say, well, no, that just means humans' minds are more evolved. Well, if they're more evolved, then that leads to another question. Whatever happened to the survival of the fittest? That the more superior species survive and the inferior ones become extinct. Why is it then that there are animals and there are insects? Once humans... What is this guy doing? Okay. Once humans evolve in the evolutionary process, they would be considered the fittest of all species. I know that one of the arguments evolution say is that, well, the apes evolved into humans, but the other animals haven't progressed that far yet, so eventually they will, but it takes billions of years, or however long they say. But if it's a survival of the fittest, why do you have animals left. I understand if your argument is apes turn into humans and other animals will evolve into humans later on, well, there's no time for that. Because if the humans are the superior race or superior species and it's survival of the fittest, then what will end up happening is that the human race will destroy, because they're the superior species, will destroy all the animals. So in that case, if evolution is true and the apes evolve to become humans, well, once the apes evolve to become humans, then they will destroy all the animals, and then all that's left are humans. If survival of the fittest is true, then you end up with just one species surviving. It all consolidates into that. And then that one species controls everything. And then that one species evolves into another species, but then that species controls everything. But you don't see that happening. You see, you've got many, many kinds of insects and many, many kinds of animals. And then you've just got humans. That's all you have. If survival of the fittest is true, when the insects evolved into animals, then the animals would have killed the insects. Or it wouldn't have even got that far. The most superior insect would have destroyed all the other insects, and then that superior insect would have evolved into an animal. And then that animal would have evolved into a human. You wouldn't have multiple species of different categories like that existing if survival of the fittest is true. But yet, we have everything existing, and it's interesting that we only have one human species. You know, animals, there are insects, there are clearly distinctions. You've got crawling insects, you've got flying insects, and different types. You know, the dragonfly is a lot different from a gnat, for example, or a mosquito is different. Then you've got the birds. An ostrich is much different from a hummingbird. A blue jay is different from, I don't know, a crane, for example. And then you've got animals. A beaver is much different from a hippopotamus, which is different from an elephant, which is different from a lion. You've got all of these species that are so different, and yet they all survive. Why haven't they all been eliminated except for the humans? And then you look at the humans, well, there is only one human race. There is no other species that is in our category. I realize that these evolutionists trying to explain away God will say, well, humans are mammals, and there are a lot of other animals who are mammals as well. No, we're not the same as animals. You can say all you want about that, but humans are the only ones with a conscience. They are the only ones with, humans clearly have superior intelligence to other creatures. Insects and animals, for that matter, seem to have same intelligence. They don't even have, you would think if humans, they say, well, that's the most evolved species because of our super intelligence. But look at something like an ant. The ant is about the smallest creature out there, but it's much smarter than, I don't know. It's probably smarter than an anteater, I would imagine. Ants are real smart, hard-working little creatures. So, if intelligence is the measure by which something survives, why didn't the ant evolve? How did the anteater evolve and the ant didn't? How did some of these dumber animals that are much bigger than the ant survive? Why didn't the ant evolve since it had higher intelligence? And how did the human have the biggest and best intelligence and not have the most strength physically? There are just all sorts of problems with this, with survival of the fittest, because it's just not practical. It just hasn't happened. And why do we only have humans in the human race? We are clearly different, superior intelligence. We have a conscience. But yet, we don't have any other species that are like humans. They'll say, oh, well, an ape acts like a... Yeah, but he's clearly not a human. He doesn't have the conscience. He doesn't have the intelligence of a human. Maybe he has some mannerisms that are like humans. So the survival of the fittest thing just doesn't fly. And also, evolution doesn't work either, because it doesn't explain the conscience. It doesn't explain that everybody has a sense of right or wrong. All humans are like that, but animals and insects do not have that sense. They may say, oh, well, an animal, a mother has compassion, like a mother cat, for example, has compassion for the kittens because it takes care of them, or a mother hen has compassion for the chickens because it takes care of them. But no, those are instincts that they have. It's not compassion, it's instincts. Because you'll see certain animals don't care at all for their young. Others do. Others will go to extremes. The King Emperor Penguin, I think it's called, goes to incredibly great lengths to try to have a little penguin and then have it survive. Emperor penguins, I think they're called. Go to great lengths to have it survive, whereas other animals won't even, will abandon their young and may even eat their young. It doesn't mean that one has more compassion than the other, or one is kind, one is good, one is evil. It's just they all have different instincts, and they follow those instincts. So, I guess my point is, survival of the fittest doesn't work, and neither does evolution doesn't work, because it doesn't explain the conscience. It doesn't explain knowing right from wrong. And especially the evil side of that. Because Dawkins talks about that he rejects God, because basically the evolutionists believe that humans are good people. They've evolved into being good people, and that that God that they've created is an evil God, and religion and God were needed, necessary thousands of years ago, but now man has evolved to the point where he doesn't need that concept of God. And so man knows that there is no God. He's got enough intelligence to figure that out. And so we can get rid of this falsehood of God, and then we can just live our lives as these evolved beings. Well, if that's true, and a main reason they reject God is that they say that ancestors thought God was evil, as seen by the Old Testament God or the Islamic God, but now we know that humans are really good, and so we don't need to think of this evil God. Well, if that's the case, why does evil still exist? Evolution really became popular and started being taught in schools, well, whenever the Scopes trial was, 60, 70 years ago. Before then, you really didn't have evolution being taught. And if we've evolved into these good creatures who don't need to believe there is a God, and we've got the intelligence to figure out that we're just created by Darwinian natural selection, then why has evil increased over these 70 years? We have much more killings, murders. You watch the news every morning, you'll see some death that happened just in the biggest city that's closest to you. Much less all over the U.S., all over the world. I mean, there's just so much going on and evil that's going on. And even if the murder crime rate, let's say even if it goes down, just look at how evil, the evil that's going on now, even though it may not manifest itself in violent crimes as much, possibly, I think it does more now than before, but even if it doesn't, look at what goes on in just how people treat each other. It used to be people would, men would always open door for women, even if they're not their wives. You would always have people look out for each other. You would, if you needed, a cup of sugar or a cup of flour, you could go to your neighbor and borrow that, no problem. Or you'd be working on some project and your neighbor would be glad to help you out, would probably even volunteer to help out without you even asking. All these, just everybody was so neighborly and kind and thoughtful to others. And now it's just every man for himself. There's just so much hatred out there. And people say, oh, well, we're tolerant, we don't judge people. Well, there's more hatred in that than there ever was before they had tolerance. Because before, no one ever brought up these issues that are brought up in the media. And there's just this backbiting, going back and forth. So even if violent crime hasn't increased, which I think it has, there's still just a lot more evil in this world. So how is it that humans have evolved and are suddenly good people who don't need to think that there's an evil God, and yet, or that there's a God at all, and yet they're out there killing each other and hating each other? You can't trust anybody anymore. Pretty much anybody will try to scam you out of your money, do wrong by you, or at the least secretly hate you. No one's happy anymore. You look at TV shows. It used to be a lot of comedies and people laughed and it was great, and now it's just all these killings and drama that goes on these shows. So why is there so much evil? So again, it shows that there is a God. So even if you think he's an evil God, it's still a God must exist. If we're just a random, or we are a part of the Darwinian natural selection, I don't want to get the atheists mad at me and say it's by chance, because it's not by chance, although Darwinian natural selection really is by chance. But if it's that, then why do we have a sense of good and evil, a right from wrong? Why is it wrong that a child is molested? Why is it wrong that someone is murdered? I realize standards change, but there's still standards of good and evil. And why do we do these things to begin with? The animal kingdom, an animal that 5,000 years ago behaved exactly like it does 5,000 years ago, exactly like it does today. The instinct is still the same, but yet as humans, we're always changing. And what we think is right or wrong, or how we behave. Why is that the case? So all of this really just points to the fact that there is a God, and that evolution is so wrong that it doesn't even need any consideration. It's obvious that it is wrong. And so that's today's Candid Conversation. Thanks for watching.